Hey, everybody, it's Ed. Before we start, I've got a lot of brand new Patreon supporters that I want to thank. Scott Smith, Braden Schock, Matt Davis, Kathy Dudley, Eric Walker, Luke Coffey, and Jake Collins. All these folks went to mountainandprairie.com/support and decided to support the podcast through Patreon. And there are a lot of cool side benefits that come with that, including a behind-the-scenes tour of my backyard work shed where I do all this podcast stuff. And I put that on Instagram about a week or two ago, and I think that's what prompted all these signups. But if you want to see the shed, if you want to get book recommendations, if you want some behind-the-scenes stuff, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support and sign up. Thank you very much. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Beau Alexander. Beau is the owner and operator of Maxwell Alexander Gallery, a world-renowned art gallery that curates and celebrates a new breed of fine art here in the American West and beyond. Beau and his brother, the famed Western artist Logan Maxwell officially opened the gallery back in 2012, and their goals were simple: represent one-of-a-kind artists, put the artist's interest first, and serve as a trusted resource for a wide range of collectors around the globe. After many years of scrappy hard work and outside-the-box thinking, Maxwell Alexander Gallery has become a cornerstone of the Western art world. Beau was born and raised in Los Angeles, and from an early age he showed a talent for entrepreneurship and marketing. He and his brother Logan started a number of businesses together, combining their proclivity for creativity with the tireless work ethic they learned from their immigrant father. As Logan's art career exploded, they both saw an opportunity to create an art gallery that takes care of its artists and clients, one that plays the long game and is deeply invested in the people behind the art, not just solely focused on making a sale. So, in 2012, they opened Maxwell Alexander Gallery and have steadily risen to the top of the contemporary Western art world. And just a few weeks ago, Beau was awarded the Autry Museum's John J. Geraghty Award, which recognizes an individual for his or her advancement of contemporary Western art. Beau and I met last fall in LA at Maxwell Alexander Gallery's 10-year anniversary exhibition. So I was thrilled to have him join me for a more in-depth conversation about his journey in Western art. We started out talking about his upbringing in LA and how entrepreneurship has always been a big part of his life. We talk about some of the good and bad aspects of the old-school art gallery world that sparked the idea to create Maxwell Alexander Gallery. We talked about the early days of the business and how he had to grind and be extremely creative in order to gain a foothold in the art world. We also talk about his irreverent, oftentimes hilarious approach to using social media as a marketing tool and the importance of introducing new collectors to Western art. We talk about art valuation, the importance of treating people fairly, his other artistic influences, and his brother Logan's evolution as an artist. In this conversation, we talk a lot about Logan and the 10-year anniversary exhibition, and you can listen to both of those episodes by following the links in the episode notes. But for now, I hope you enjoy this inspiring conversation with Beau Alexander. Beau, I'm so glad to be chatting with you because last time I saw you, it was in the midst of your 10th anniversary celebration, which I was so impressed by how cool and calm you were the whole time because that was quite an event and it was so awesome. And I loved being there with y'all and being a part of it. And I appreciate y'all inviting me out. And it was such a cool intro into the world of Western art, in person. And, but I wanted to kind of go back approximately 11 years before that. So that was the 10th year anniversary. Big deal, such a great celebration. But I was wondering if you could talk about 11 years before that. So I guess in 2011, what were you doing? Like what was your career like? What was your interest in art? What would kind of set the scene in the year leading up to starting your gallery?
I think for it to make sense, I probably would have to go even further back, but I'll try to summarize it pretty quickly.
No, man, take your time. This is my podcast, so you can talk as long as you want.
I think ultimately, let me go back to the beginning. my brother is Logan Maxwell Alexander, and he's become one of the leading artists that's working in this genre at this time. Him and I are 3 years apart, and if you look back to our childhood, we were always just interested in starting businesses around our interests. And so, our dad comes from a third world country and was a, entrepreneur, when he came to met my mom, who's American, and they moved to the US, or he moved to the US and did his thing as an immigrant does, and was an entrepreneur and everything. So we were really exposed to that lifestyle of entrepreneurship and kind of taking things into your, taking action and, controlling your own destiny in a way. But more than anything, I think when we were younger, we just saw it as having fun and having like a deeper interest in our hobbies. So, when we were in middle school, high school, we were big surfers. We'd go pretty much every day. Our local break was Malibu. And, we always kind of seemed to be adjacent to what's really in style. At the time it was a little bit more what you would call modern surfing. And we always were into stuff that happened in the 60s. So we would study the surfers from the 60s and their style and the boards that they rode and, their clothing style, just everything. And, Logan being such a hands-on, talented type of person, his mind and hand connection is so strong. He was like, I want to start making surfboards. So he jumped in, he started making boards, and then we would collaborate on designing them, and then I was a quote unquote team rider. So I would, ride the boards out and everyone jumped on, wanted to buy them. Nice. And then that just kind of snowballed into more and more businesses. Like him and I have probably started 10 different businesses together. We had when I graduated, I went to school for business, and Logan would kind of jumped into art. He's 3 years older than I am. So he was already going full blast into his art, and he went to art school, and, he was doing his thing. It was a slow build for him because he didn't really have anyone to give him that guidebook of how to be a successful artist. I would help him out as much as I could from a management standpoint and maybe give him advice and try to make his life slightly easier while I was going to business school and try to handle a little bit of his business, aspects of his world. And then after I graduated with a business degree, I got into the clothing world, and him and I started a clothing company together. Again, we collaborated a lot, both of us doing design and marketing. And then after 2008, I had to get a real job, and, I started working in advertising. Logan continued with his art career, and around 2009, I'd say 2010, Logan's art career really started to take off. He found his style, and this really unique, modern, stylized version of the West, and really unique and interesting and really different. Which, when something is so different in a very conservative art market, sometimes it takes a long time for people to understand something special. And Logan was really lucky to have, a relatively quick build once he really established his style. And so he was just completely overwhelmed. It was almost like someone hit a light switch. And he asked me if I would leave my job in advertising and kind of manage him full time. And I jumped at that opportunity because, me working for someone else in a corporate setting, it just...
How was that?
The funniest thing for me, coming from always having my own business, is that when I got a job working in an actual corporate setting, it was so easy for me because I was like, this is all you do. You have one job, you only have to focus on this one area. Yeah. And where I was used to focusing on everything, from A to Z. And now I only had to focus on A or B. And so it was really easy. but not in a good way. Cause I
Yeah,
just
you
felt,
probably don't like easy, that kind of easy at least. One other question for you about that real quick. You said you went to, you studied business. Did you get much out of that? Because, I think there's no substitute for actually doing it and starting business. And by the time you got to business school, you were kind of already seasoned in the world of being an entrepreneur. And so did you get much out of the official schooling in that?
I think consciously, like if I try to pull something that I gained from there, I can't think of one, but I'm sure subconsciously there were some principles that I learned that, I've put into use. And once I got deeper into business, I think it became more relevant. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, I was pretty disappointed because the whole program at my college was really teaching you how to function in a corporate setting and less so about doing your own thing. So yeah, I mean, I didn't get my MBA. I started a business as soon as I got out of college, and I believe that was my MBA. I probably lost the same amount of money as it would have cost to have an MBA, but I also think I learned so much more in how to run a business. And
oh, no question, man. I heard an interview recently with some very successful entrepreneur. I can't remember who it was, but somebody that we both would have heard of, and who also had the fancy education and everything. And he was kind of mouthing off a little bit, but he said the average drug dealer on the street probably has more of a business education than most people coming out of business school when it comes to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I think there's no substitute to just getting in there and getting your hands dirty and making mistakes and, trying to figure it out. And I don't know. And that entrepreneurial spirit, I don't know that you can be taught that really.
It's a hustle, not a hustle mentality, but it's like a hustle spirit or something. We saw it all our life at home is, our dad hustling and doing what he needed to do to take care of, 4 kids and a wife. And so I think it's just ingrained in us. I mean, I heard, I don't know if this is a reference people really, I mean, everyone knows Jay-Z, I guess now, but
oh yeah,
Jay-Z had the same thing. Like his story is, he started in the projects and he was a drug dealer and et cetera, et cetera. And he used that hustle mentality of being a drug dealer and he applied it to business and became legitimate. And, his success goes from there.
I just read a book about Jay-Z about that very thing. And it was, I didn't know much about him. I just knew he was extremely successful, and it's fascinating, that guy's trajectory. I mean, like it's a uniquely American story, and he's about as successful as a person can be when it comes to artistically and business wise. So I imagine that's a cool guy for you to watch,
Yeah. I mean, I love success stories, and, I'll jump a little bit forward. I think part of the reason I've been successful in this art business is, when I come across art collectors who, tend to have disposable income, I'm really curious in how they became successful and what their story was. And so, when we go to dinner or whatever, they're in the gallery, I'm not shoving paintings down their throat and trying to get them to buy like a used car or something. I'm genuinely curious in them and their life and, their business backgrounds. And I think that there's just naturally, it's just an interest that I have, and I become friends with a lot of my clients, and it just becomes way more of a fun environment versus just a transactional relationship.
Well, and that's what I heard from so many of the collectors who've worked with you over the years is that exact thing, but from their perspective that there's just a true curiosity and a true desire to want to build these relationships. And in my limited experience, I mean, I used to be in the real estate business selling these big fancy ranches to kind of the, in some ways a similar socioeconomic group of people. And, that can be rare. When you've got that kind of disposable income, there can be people kind of circling you, opportunists all the time. And so the fact that when they come across somebody that really wants to learn, really has a curiosity about what they're doing and wants to form a long-term relationship, I think that's different than the norm, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I just base it on my own life. Like when I go into an art gallery or if I visit a whatever, any type of store, and all they're doing is trying to sell me something, my first instinct is to run. Good art sells itself. So I'm basically just the facilitator, and I'm the voice of reason. And I try to guide the collectors with, I never want a painting to come back it's happened so few times that someone bought a painting and regretted it. And like, I never want someone to buy a painting that they're unsure about. And I would, if I sense that from someone, I'll tell them like, you just sleep on this, come back in a week. I'll put it on hold for you, because I would hate for you to buy it and then come back and return it, or sell it elsewhere or something like that. I never want to force someone into that. I want someone to because when you buy a painting that you love, it's really a special situation, and you get these butterflies in your stomach. You get it in your home, and you love that painting more and more every day. It pays you dividends every time you look at it. When you buy a great painting, you love it more and more, and you see different things every time you look at it. Now, when you don't buy a great painting, the opposite happens.
Just anger under the surface.
Yeah, you get buyer's remorse. You're start to see why you don't like it as much, and all the opposite happens. So really what we try to do at the gallery is, we've become such a discerning eye, and we said we were only going to represent the top artists, so that even if a beginner walks in, they have no idea what makes up a good painting, but internally they could feel it. If they look at quality art, you could feel it. But if you walk into our gallery and you're a brand new buyer, we wanted people to not be able to make a mistake.
Well, I've got two questions, but I'll ask them one at a time. One, can you talk about how you go about selecting or finding artists that you want to represent? Because when I was there, and again, this is just my personal experience, but obviously the artists are super talented. But what struck me was truly every single one of them that I talked to, and I think I talked to probably 90% of them, where they were just super cool and like super down to earth and humble and appreciative of, being, everything from being there at the show to the ability to be a professional artist. And they just, it was it made me feel better about the world, because they were just all such nice people. So like, I guess that's maybe one standard, but then, how do you go about judging the actual art? Like that, not judging it, but knowing, all right, this is a fit for what we're doing here.
That's a good question. And I'm not even sure if I have a solid answer. It's really an intuitive thing. And, Logan and I have, for whatever reason, we have very, very similar tastes and a very similar eye. So I get submissions daily, at the gallery, and I could look at it, and within 2 seconds, it's usually a no, to be honest. I don't want to sound whatever.
No, it has to be. That makes sense to me. I would think it'd be weird otherwise. I would have been very surprised if you said, yeah, 90%, we just let them in, whatever.
Yeah. I don't even know what it is, because we've taken artists that they didn't even know it would be possible to have a career in art. And maybe it was something that they envisioned and a dream that they had, but they were, they had families or whatever, and they were doing other things, and art wasn't their main focus. But we somehow came across their art and saw something that we believed could develop into something special. And so, at our gallery, we tend to look forward a little bit more than backwards. The general art market, and I'm just focusing on the Western, when I say this, is pretty traditional, and it's pretty common that you'll hear someone say like, oh, wow, that looks like a picture. If you were to say that to the artists in our gallery, that wouldn't necessarily be a compliment, because their goal is not to make something look like a picture. Their goal is to make something look like a painting, and their vision of how they see the world. And so that's really what we look for. We look for someone that, one, is a great artist, two, has a unique vision, and three, they got to be a good person, because, if you run into someone that's, an egomaniac or, disrespectful or dishonest. It's just, for me, it's, I would never do business with someone like that. And when those things come to light, I cut the relationship off pretty quickly because it's not worth it to me. And I don't want that to feed into the collectors, because if the collectors start to learn that about the artist, then it makes us look bad. It's we base everything on integrity and handshakes, and and our goal is always to benefit the artist first. And when we get into things, like Logan and I talk daily about how we could benefit the artist in the gallery, or if we got a show coming up, how could we make it the best show for this particular artist? And I don't think you're going to find that anywhere else. Like, what other artist went out of their way to start a business to help other artists? I'm not sure it exists.
Well, and that's something I'd like you to hit on. I mean, in my experience, I've talked to a ton of artists, and for people who want to hear more about Logan was on the podcast years ago. You can go back and listen to that. I'll link to that in the episode notes. But it's funny because with a lot of the artists I talk to, in interviews, generally they don't really talk about galleries. And then when I turn off the recorder, I've had many artists kind of complain about the gallery system. And the thing is, like, that is the 100% exact opposite of every conversation I had in LA with the artists that you guys represent. And so can you, like, what was the niche you were filling here? Like, I know you probably don't want to trash anybody, but like, when you're saying what you're saying, it's like, of course everybody would do business like that. Like, that seems like the right way to do business, but it's very different from what all the artists talk about other than you guys. So, like, how are you different than other galleries?
I think we have a different perspective. Logan, being an artist, he ran through all the other stuff that all those other artists are saying, all the negative things that you're hearing from artists about other galleries. Logan experienced all that, not being paid, or, paintings getting stolen from the gallery, or just dishonest situations. And, I was alongside him for all that stuff. So I'm aware of, exactly what happens out there, unfortunately. And so, I have the perspective of the artist, and then I have the perspective of the gallery. And so I'm able to really pull from both and really make sure that we're doing things correctly. But you're totally right. It's not, we're talking about just being honest. That's basically it. If you're honest and you have integrity, then that's our secret. Anyone can do that. The problem is, in the art world, the artists are really separated from the gallery. So if a gallery wanted to, they could do all these things that a lot of them do. And they feel like they're in such a power position that, the artists kind of can't say anything or don't say anything because they don't want to, ruin the relationship, because they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, etc. So we just came in and we wanted to be a safe space for artists. And that was, really coming from Logan's, perspective. He wanted a place where we could control, kind of take the power out of these other galleries that were treating artists wrong and, representing 100 artists and just treating them all pretty badly and not giving anyone attention and really not giving a focus, a vision of what this art world could look like. Yeah, that was really it. Just take care of artists. That was our focus, and we knew the rest would follow.
From a business perspective, so you were working with Logan, and plenty of business there as his career was getting so hot. But was there a point when you started representing other artists when you were like, all right, we got something here like this? Like I couldn't ever see you as the kind of guy who's like, oh, I got it made. I'm done. I can relax. I mean, you're always going to be hammering, but like, was there a point where you and Logan maybe looked at each other and were like, oh man, I think we're onto something here? Or was it more of a slow burn?
Yeah, it's a good question. I got to think back. I mean, I'll jump back a little bit and try to answer that. So when I did leave my advertising job and started to work for Logan full time, his career was just, like I said, like if someone hit a light switch, almost, it just took off. And so I was helping him setting up his business, got him a proper accountant, made sure his business was registered properly, and really tried to automate everything from the business side so that he could just focus on painting. And so, financially, he started doing really well at the time, but still running into these frustrations with galleries. And so when a space in Los Angeles opened up, he was like, I want to open a gallery. This is my vision of it, to make it only represent great artists, don't have any filler, really make sure the artists are treated well. And he's like, and I want you to do it with me. He's like, I want you to be my partner in it and help run it and everything. So, about 6 months into that, and that happened within, like, the space opened up, and I think a month later we had the lease, and we were calling all of Logan's friends to ask them if they would be in the gallery. And Logan had such a great reputation that all of his friends trusted him and his vision, and they all said yes. And luckily all of his friends happened to be really great artists. So, but I remember sitting in the gallery. We didn't have a client list. We didn't have any money. We had little money that Logan put up to get things running. We're showing Western art in Los Angeles, and I just remember sitting in the gallery like, oh, what do I do now? and I think our rent at the time was $2,500. And so we were stressing out, like, how are we going to cover $2,500 a month?
Yeah.
How are we going to? So somehow just by bringing together the group of artists that we brought together and really utilizing the early days of social media and free advertising that way. And we asked all the artists in the gallery to promote to their audiences as well. We slowly started to build this kind of cult following. And other artists of note looked at the core artists that we had, and they were like, wow, that's such a strong group. We want to be a part of that.
Yep.
And so our core group started to grow with, all these notable artists. Things started to become slightly more consistent as far as sales. It was a very slow burn. I mean, if you look at the first probably 5 years, it was a lot of hustling, and we really wouldn't have made it had it not been for Logan, because his career was so hot and I had access to him, obviously, that, when we needed cash flow and, maybe there wasn't money for rent or something like that, he would give the gallery a painting. I would, be able to easily sell it, and then he wouldn't take any commission. He would just leave all the money in the gallery. And then I would then take that money and, we would buy paintings from artists who were struggling, or we would, pay for advertising in the magazines. And we would just take all that money and reinvest it into the artists in the gallery. And, Logan sacrificed himself for years, not taking any of those commissions and, really trying to put back other artists financially. And so, we were just constantly reinvesting. But yeah, I would say after, 5 or 6 years, it started to get a little easier. And, just in the last probably 4 years, it's really taken off. So it's been, 10 years of basically working 7 days a week, even on vacation, at night. And, my partner, Lorena, she's so supportive, but she really sees the struggle and she really has to deal with.
She's awesome, by the way. I had so much fun hanging with her, and the intensity that all of y'all were working at, the intensity level, you were doing everything, getting set up. I remember I stopped by the gallery a few times, like in off hours, to make sure different things like the AV stuff. And you were there every single time, like moving boxes around. It's no joke. And she was there too. And it was super inspiring. Yeah. And I think that's important for people to hear that, a 10-year overnight success, y'all have been grinding for a long time.
Yeah.
One question about those early days. One of the things that I think is so funny or cool is how funny and kind of irreverent you are with your advertising, like especially on social media. Like in the lead up to one of these events, the little like the memes or whatever they're called that you'll put on Instagram are it's unlike anything that I've seen in the Western art world. And I used to live in Jackson Hole, and you walk around the town square, all these like stuffy galleries are. And what y'all are doing is so far from taking yourself real seriously. And so has that always been like 9 years ago? Did you have that approach of not taking yourself seriously, or did it take you a while to get up the confidence to do it your own way fully?
Yeah, it definitely took time. I mean, I think we were, or at least I am, the youngest gallery owner that I know of by quite some years. And at the time when when Logan and I started, I think I was 28 years old, 28 or 29. And, we're doing business with people that are serious business people, multi-millionaires, if not billionaires. And we definitely were aware of the conservativeness of, not just our clients, but just in general in business. You don't want to offend people, and you want to kind of make sure that you're putting out a professional attitude. So definitely in the beginning, it was way more conservative and not really showing our humor. I think behind the scenes, if you come to any of the dinners or something and you're hanging with us and the artists, all we're doing is laughing. We're not even talking about art. We're just joking. We're talking about surfing, or we're just laughing and just talking about different stuff. And it basically grew out of, for lack of a better term, it grew out of boredom. I just got frustrated with how kind of serious and straightforward everything was. And I was like, man, we need to just show everyone that this could be fun. And, the art world isn't so stuffy unless you let it be. So yeah, I just went crazy with memes and poking fun at other art galleries that I think don't do it right. And I think, there's a big age gap between the other galleries and our gallery. And I look at them and they're just so old fashioned, and they're stuck in the 80s. And, I'm not the biggest fans of their work ethic or their ethics in general. And so I just needle them a little bit. They're all 30, 40 years older than I am. So what are they going to do?
It's really funny, man. Like those memes you do. Before I met you, I was like, who is coming up with this stuff? And it's really
they're surprisingly difficult to put together.
Yeah, that's what I've tried to make a few Roadhouse inspired memes, and it's like it's some work to put those things together. So I'm impressed. You're a man of many talents. How long? This may be hard to answer, but how long did it take the stuffy, old timey art world to, I don't know if you'd say accept or to take you guys seriously? Because I would imagine, like in any established business, when the newcomer rolls in, people kind of, the status quo and the entrenched players kind of laugh a little bit. But given the award you just won the other week, is serious business now. That's accepted by everybody. Beau just won this very prestigious award at the Autry. Is it pronounced Geraghty Award?
Yeah, you got it.
The Geraghty Award. So, I mean, the art world has embraced y'all big time. How long did that take?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So an artist reminded me of something during our 10-year anniversary weekend that you referenced a couple times back in October. He said that a competing gallery owners made the comment when we first opened, they'll be done in a year, or they'll be out of business in a year.
I love comments like that. Do you get power from those kind of comments?
I didn't even remember it, but like my response when he brought it up to me was like, oh, he was almost right. We almost didn't last a year. It's a tough business. But yeah, I just think it's funny. It's so foreign to me that to try to criticize in that serious manner. Like I criticize other galleries and poke fun at them, but I don't even think about them because they're just so irrelevant to me.
Yeah. Well, you're cranking, man. You got enough to do,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't even look at the art magazines. We advertise in them. I don't even look at them. I don't really look at other art on social media or any of that stuff. I don't want to be influenced or do anything. I just want us to do our thing. And I think we came out the gate swinging because when we put together our core group of artists, which, if I think back, it's, Logan, Glenn Dean, Billy Shank, Josh Elliott. I think in the beginning, Jeremy Lipking was in there. And then on the contemporary realism side, like, we had Michael Klein and Joshua LaRock and David Caston. Anyways, these names will mean something to some people, but
yeah.
And I'm forgetting some people as well. So I apologize. We came out of the gate with about 10 killer artists. And so people took notice pretty quickly. But, it took several years for us to really start hitting those high, 6-figure sales and, consistently selling multi-million dollars of art every year. It definitely, you have to get a level of, respect before you hit those numbers. But really, a lot of it started from marketing, because I would have people, our first space that was in Culver City in Los Angeles, as a suburb of LA, was only about 1,500 square feet. And so I used to have people come visit, and they would go like, well, I thought this gallery was going to be like 10,000 square feet based on your marketing. And, based on your presence out in the world, I just assumed this was going to be the biggest gallery I've ever seen. And so, we just utilized kind of guerrilla marketing and just doing what we could, because, we didn't have the luxury of sitting on a pile of cash that our parents gave us, or, investment money. And I'm not criticizing people that do have that, but we didn't have that. And so, it was just a hustle. I almost can't even remember it. It's a blur, because I was just had my nose to the grind. And only recently, I feel like the 10-year anniversary, I was able to kind of wake up a little bit and see where we're at and appreciate it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's another question I had written down here is you've had some distance from that, because it was a awesome event with awesome people in full all in for many days. And now that you've been able to kind of decompress from that a little bit, what are your thoughts on that whole experience?
I feel like that event was really validating for our vision of what this art market should look like. It was the biggest show we ever had. The gallery was full of paintings, which it usually isn't. We like to hang the gallery in a very sparse way to let the art really breathe. But we had, over 100 paintings, I think, in this show, and sculptures and things like that. So, but it was really discerning, again, a discerning eye, and curated in a way that was really at a high level. And I asked each of the artists to paint a major painting. And it's hard to get artists to paint big, because they got to put a lot of time into that. And if that painting doesn't sell, it's a big loss for them. And it, it could look bad just from the outside looking in, like, oh, why didn't that sell? And it's also bad from a financial standpoint. So I was really nervous from that perspective. We had, I don't know how much dollar value in art we had in the gallery for that show, but it was large, and there were big paintings, 40 by 60, 60 by 60, 50 by 50 inches, and 48 by 60 inches. You were there, Ed. You remember when we walked into the gallery after you and I and a group of Kim Wiggins, Eric Bowman, Logan Maxwell, and T. Allen Lawson. You conducted a panel for us beforehand in the next door space, and then we walked into the gallery afterwards. And it's a pretty large space that we have now, and we couldn't even get inside. It was just shoulder to shoulder. So much art sold, more than I think anyone expected. We hit 7 figures. I think that was just validation that we practice what we preach. And we're out here kind of away from the West a little bit, even though obviously we're in the West. This was just a validation. We had clients flying in from all over the country. We had people cutting their vacations short to be there. All the artists came out to support, and so much of Los Angeles showed up to support. And people traveled, even just fans of the art traveled from far to be there. So looking back, I don't think it could have gone any better. It was a pretty special event.
I remember when we were doing that panel, and you were kind of at one end of the group, and I was at the other end, and you had your back, you were kind of faced inward. And at some point you looked over your shoulder and saw all those people standing there. It was like all the seats had well filled up, and there was and you were like, oh my God, I can't believe you were like legit shocked. I was not. I mean, it was very evident what a loyal group of people you've built there. Another question just about kind of the finances of art. I'm always curious how you value these paintings, because I keep talking about the real estate thing and it's super boring compared to what you're doing. But when I was selling these fancy ranches, they're not like production ranches. It's not something you can look at on a spreadsheet and be like, all right, we get this many cows. It's for wealthy people who want a place to fly fish and chase elk around and maybe ride a horse. And so you can look at comparable sales, like on a per acre value. You can look at the value of the buildings or any improvements, but then there's always this X factor of the views or the person who's buying it. They love trout so much and it happens to have one of the best trout streams in the world. And so you can kind of figure out a value, but then you never know because there's an X factor. And I would guess in your world, you can look at comparable sales from the same artist and figure out some formula, but then there's this just deep emotional bond between the collector and the artist that could affect the value big time one way or the other. So like when you're helping these artists figure out, all right, how much are we going to charge for this thing? How do you go about doing that?
It's definitely a tricky thing. And it's a common question that we get, like who prices this painting? Who came up with this price? And it's different between living artists who are still creating new paintings and, deceased artists that obviously are not creating new paintings. So it's a totally different ball game on how you price and determine. Just quickly, if you're looking at a deceased artist, the number one thing people are going to do is look at past auction records and try to determine it. But when you're looking at a deceased artist, you really want to work with a professional that knows the body of work of any particular artist that you're interested in, because they'll be able to tell you whether it's a good one or if it's just a mediocre painting and whether you should really come out of pocket for this individual painting because it's a special one. Maybe there's certain artists that have been around and popular long enough that you can't even really find many of them because most are in museums. So, certain artists like that, we're like, okay, you got to jump. Like now's the time to go for it. And then obviously we would look at past auction results and try to come up with a number. But like you said, if it's a special piece, if it's the one you've been waiting for, that painting's worth whatever you're willing to pay for it. There's art collectors where $1 million is not a lot of money to them. And so, or $100,000 or whatever their level is. And so it might sound like a lot of money and it is, but to some people it's not. So art is really worth what someone's willing to pay for it. Similar to real estate in the sense that if you get that special architectural home that you've been waiting for, or that Frank Lloyd Wright or whatever it is, there's people that are going to come out of pocket because they know how important they are. On the flip side, for a living artist, it's way more difficult to determine, and it's way more sensitive, especially from my perspective, because I think of the artist and their livelihood. Most all of them have families. And so we have to be really careful and make sure that this artist can have their career for the rest of their lives and take care of their family. And so, if it's a brand new artist, we'll usually start them at a pretty attractive price, which is all relative to art. It's going to be a few $1,000s, which is going to be a low price. And then we'll put a lot of work in that beginning, and we have the reputation with our clientele that if we present a new artist, they know we're not just trying to get money. They know that it's an artist that we really believe in, that is going to be good for the future and really develop. And so we'll present these to our clients and recommend that they jump on board and, help support this artist to get where we think they should be. And so we'll slowly kind of tick those prices up. And, for the first 5 years, we'll probably just do, close to 10% increases every year. And hopefully, those paintings are continuing every show. Hopefully they're selling out. In the beginning, we really like the price to quality ratio to be really offset. We want the quality to be way higher than the price.
Oh yeah.
And so people really feel like they're getting a value and they're buying a great piece of art, but they're buying in early. So they're getting a value with that. If things go as we expect they'll go and things continue to sell out, once you get to a more established point, I believe in pricing a painting on somewhat of a sliding scale. So let's say it's a 16 by 20 inch painting that typically would sell for $10,000. If an artist brings me a painting and it's a 10, probably when it's almost too good to sell for $10,000. And even they feel it, they go like, man, I think I want to keep this. We sit down and say, well, what price do you feel comfortable at? And they tell me 15 grand, or I might suggest, and maybe it should be 15 instead of 10. Then that's what we'll do. And I'm really upfront about that. If we present it to a client, I let them know, like, look, this typical price for this painting is probably 10 to 12,000, but this one is priced at 15 or 18,000 for this reason. And I try to be as transparent as possible. And if the collector is okay with that and aware of that, then it's all good. So yeah, it's tricky though, because if you think of some of the artists that I'm working with that are in their 30s, and they got to think about where they're going to be in their 70s, and if they start doing too much now, or they have a really quick rise and they ride that wave too heavy, you don't want it to crash, because what's the backup plan? These to be an artist at the level that we're representing, it's not a hobby. This is all that these artists they're putting 110% into this. There's no backup plan. And so we try to be really conscious of that.
That, you mentioned transparent, and then the long-term approach, thinking out decades instead of months or years. Like I promise I wasn't being like a private investigator when I was at your event and like snooping around, but like checking up on you. But those are the word. Transparent is a word that I kept hearing over and over and over, which again, if you're a somewhat ethical person, you'd be like, aren't they all transparent? I'm like, nope.
No, I want to point out I just want to mention this one thing, is that when you talk about the memes and all the jokey stuff and things, not jokey stuff, but just fun that we have with the gallery. One of the shows that was actually an idea of Logan's was our Black Friday exhibition. And I feel like that encompasses our kind of world for whatever reason. So just quickly, when it's an exhibition we hold on Black Friday, where we ask all the artists in the gallery, and we invite a lot of guest artists to create at least one original piece of art priced at $2,500 and under. And then, most artists will do multiple pieces, and the prices might range a little bit. But so we started that show, and Logan's idea to start that show was to open up the art world to new collectors and people that, might not have the budget to come out of pocket, 5, 7, 6 figures, whatever. And so it was a way for us, because that's always been a goal for the gallery, is to expand the Western market beyond the niche that it's in. And we wanted to expose it to so much more. And, and that's why we've been doing projects with Pendleton, projects with Stetson. We have documentaries in the works, and we're doing a lot of video content and things that are coming in the coming months. But our Black Friday show, it started, I think the first year, I think it was like 10 grand or something like that. And we sold like 10 paintings. This last year, we sold 110 paintings in about 20 minutes, with probably 90 of those paintings selling in the first 5 minutes. And so that show has just become this cult following, and that's really where I hear from collectors all year long. Some go, "Man, I bought my first painting ever in this show," and other seasoned collectors that go, "Oh, it was so much fun. We jumped on the computer after Thanksgiving, and we're going crazy, anxiety. You put a painting in your shopping cart, like someone else bought it before you. And it's just this crazy thing." So that excitement around that exhibition is really what we're about. And we've kind of tried to carry that into other things. And I think it was evident in our 10-year anniversary, the excitement that was generated there. And sometimes art doesn't feel that exciting, and so we're really trying to make it more accessible. And so the transparency aspect is that, we don't want that intimidation. Like when you walk in our gallery, we don't want you to feel intimidated. We want you to feel happy and excited to be around cool stuff.
Yeah. And at the event, I met several people who were a lot younger than me. And as far as I could tell, like not some, sitting on John D. Rockefeller's trust fund. I mean, they were just normal people who loved art. And a lot of them talked about that Black Friday sale as a way that they got in, were able to get into the Western art world without, having to take out a mortgage on their house or something. And so when you get these young collectors or people that are interested, that want to get in, that have saved up some money and they've got a love of art, but they're also interested in the actual investment of it, kind of that sweet spot there. Do you have any kind of standard advice you give to those people, like what they should be looking for? mistakes to avoid, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, my advice is across the board is to buy what you like, and if it turns out that it's worth something, then cool, but never try to buy something because you think it's going to be worth, more than what you paid for it. I would never tell someone, buy this, you could sell it in a year. Actually, if someone told me that was their purpose, I wouldn't sell them the painting.
And you do that sometimes, don't you? Like you won't, if it comes down to it, you don't sell to just anybody who says they want it, right?
Yeah. I mean, if I try to vet people as much as I can, especially if I don't have a relationship with them. And if they tell me, I'm looking to invest some money and hoping I could, sell it in a couple of years, I will not sell them a painting. I'll probably blackball them, to be honest. But it's just not the business we're in. We don't want.
That's not what you do.
Yeah, we're not here for people to speculate. We want to build collections for people that they're going to enjoy their whole life and maybe leave to their kids, or maybe in 20, 30 years they want to sell it. Okay. But we're not looking for people to gamble on artists' careers, because that's really what they're doing. When someone buys a living artist painting and then they go and throw it in auction, what they're doing is they're gambling on that artist's career. Mm-hmm. And if that painting does bad, then it's going to make all of our lives, not their lives, because whatever, they're going to lose a little bit of money. But we have careers that we're dealing with. And these are people that, like I said, they have families, they have a livelihood. This is their livelihood. And so imagine someone coming in and being able to take a piece of your career and gamble it. And, so, and on the flip side, if it does really well, then all of a sudden, everyone else that owns that artist's art, they own their paintings or sculptures, all of a sudden they look at it like a dollar sign. Yeah. Wait a second. I paid 20 grand for this. It's now worth 150 grand. I don't know if I like it that much. I'd rather have the money, Mm-hmm. And so it further perpetuates the notion of investment and buying for the wrong reasons. And so, yeah, we definitely blackball those people and don't want to work with those types.
If I was still in the real estate business, you could have sent them to me. I was like, I got a guy that can help you with some speculation.
I honestly, I think there's a lot of similarities in the real estate business and the art business. You're dealing with a high valued asset, I guess.
Yes.
And, you're trying to connect buyer and seller. And so you're marketing in a certain way and you're treating things in a certain way. The only difference is there's no laws or rules in the art business. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of these galleries run wild, because no one's watching. And unfortunately, it's the artists that end up at the short end of that stick.
I know a place where they don't.
Yeah, we're trying
to. What kind of, you mentioned that you try to stay away from Western art, outside of your work, just because you want to kind of keep your perspective as it is. But like, what kind of art do you, I don't know if the consume's the right word, but like music or theater or films? I mean, like what kind of stuff makes you excited outside of painting or sculpture?
I mean, I shouldn't say I don't look at other art, because I do. It's unavoidable. I'm at a lot of the museum exhibitions and the auctions and stuff like that. But I'm easily not influenced by it, because I really feel like the quality of so much of it is just subpar. And if anything, it's frustrating to me that I see that type of stuff is selling. So in some ways, it's frustrating, and that's part of the reason why I don't look at it. But no, I mean, I live in Pasadena, which is northeast Los Angeles, and we have a museum out here called the Norton Simon Museum that not many people know about, but it's got paintings in its collection that you would just assume is in the Louvre or somewhere in the Tate in London or something like that. Just, famous Picasso paintings, famous Matisse and Monet. And so just kind of world-class European art. And then it spans, it goes all the way to Agnes Martin and, American modernism and things like that. So I love all that type of stuff. And I really like minimalism and modernism. And so that's really why our focus in the gallery is modernism and minimalism and forward-leaning artists that still pay homage to representational art, but they have a modern twist to them. And so, that's what I'm attracted to. If I told you some of my favorite artists, it would be probably, a head scratcher like Ellsworth Kelly, or that's, a historic artist, or even today, some of the contemporary artists that I look at that are out of New York that are super minimalist. I mean, I love Agnes Martin. If you look at one of her paintings, it could just be a grid of pencil, with a wash behind it. And to the general public, they're like, it's one of those paintings that you just don't get, but once you get deeper into the art world and understanding how important those shifts in art were, you start to appreciate them a lot more. And, that comment that you hear so often is like, oh, I could do that. Like when you look at modern art, and, that the response that we always have is, well, you didn't do it. That person came up with that idea, and it was a monumental shift in thinking of what art is and what it could be. And so, a lot of the art that's going on in the West is very realistic, or attempting to be realistic, and in the sense that their goal, I think, is to try to make it look like a photograph. And for me, and I don't want to disparage anyone, because I think any artist that's able to make a living making art is amazing, so I don't want to disparage anyone, but for me personally, I want to buy a painting from an artist that sees the world differently than I do. If I could look at a scene and then a painting comes out, it looks just like that scene that I saw, well, it's not that special to me. I want someone like Logan or Brett Allen Johnson or Ellsworth Kelly, or, you want to go in the Western world, we could talk about Bloom and Shine from the Tau Society of Artists, or Dunton, Hennings, Higgins, these people that looked at the world and processed it through their vision, their brain. That's one thing. Okay. I could do that at times, but I can't articulate that through my hand. And Sure. Then they have that mind-hand connection of being able to be a fully realized artist and really show their vision of the world. Those are the type of artists that we want to highlight, because we think that that's special. If you paint something that looks like a picture, you're technically a great artist. That's not easy to do. But are you a special artist? Are you an artist that separates you from, in art history and something that's going to be remembered over time? I don't think so personally. Again, there's people that love that type of art, and more power to them. But for me, it's just not my interest. So,
no, I love that. Well, it reminded me of what you're saying there at the end in our live panel, which is recorded and out as a podcast. I'll link to it. But Kim Wiggins was talking about when he was starting out and kind of early on in art, and he had one of his paintings in a gallery, and he was so excited, and he walked in the gallery and saw it across the way, and he walked over to this painting, and it wasn't his. And he was like, oh man, my work looks like everybody else's. And that's when he decided to really find his own voice, for lack of a better term, and become, the Kim Wiggins that everybody knows now. And I thought that was, and I think that's kind of, that's a great representation of a lot of the artists, if not all of them at your gallery. They're just, you can see them from across the way, and there's no mistaking who you're looking at. You're never going to mix it up with some other artist. Do you think that's right?
Absolutely. And there's so many artists that are influenced by the artists in our gallery that are, trying to do something really similar. And it's just not there. There's just that thing that intangible thing that makes a great painting. You almost can't put your finger on it. I could talk to you about composition, about values, about application of paint and just all that stuff. But there's something that when an artist has a true vision, that it separates them. And, the copycats of the worlds are just trying to play catch up. Whereas that original artist is just they're already on to the next thing by the time people realize what's happened. That's something I always recommend when someone says, well, who should I collect? Or, what type of art? If they're unsure of what they like, I always say, you want an artist that has a clear vision, an artist that's not going to be confused with another one. And that's usually a good starting point.
Well, I got one more question for you. I'm always trying to understand all these cool people that I have on the podcast. I'm like, how do how do they end up doing this stuff? Like, what were their influences? I say kind of half joking, but it's not really a joke, that everything on this podcast is directed at my 23-year-old self when I was like working at Merrill Lynch and kind of bored and trying to figure out how to do something interesting. It's like, if I could have talked to these people then. Are there any books? I usually ask about books, but given your immersion in all things art, books, films, music, whatever, that you think about as being very influential in your development as a person, personally and professionally? Like, I don't even know if you have time to read all that much, but any suggestions that I can put in the episode notes that have been important to you that other people might want to read? I'd love some recommendations.
If we were on a video, you'd see I got a bookshelf behind me full of books.
Logan's got a massive one at his studio.
Yeah. I've got a baby version of what he's got. I don't have quite that much space, and probably my books are slightly different than his. Mine are a mixture of art books and business books. I feel like this is the most talked about book ever, but it was a eye-opening book for me, even coming from, a business background with my family and or seeing, my dad in business and going to business school. But Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a great introduction to business. It's eye-opening in a way. The concepts are so simple. Just thinking of assets versus liabilities. I've taken a lot from that book and applied it to my life and to the way that I do business. And it's a really easy read. If anyone hasn't read that book, I would highly recommend it. Besides that, I have a ton of art books behind me, just, and they range from, I have a book by a graffiti artist named Revoke. I have a book by David Hockney. And then I have books, I have Logan's book. I have books on the Tau Society of Artists, on Remington Russell, and then I also have books on gardening. I have, business books on real estate and how to argue and win every time. That's a good one.
I need that one.
Yeah.
You think it works against 5-year-old little girls?
I don't know if you can do that, but there's no winning there, I don't think. No, but I just got back from, I spent 2 weeks in Tokyo recently. Every time it's my third time in Japan, and travel, it really influences a lot of the way I do business and the way I look at art. And, every time I go to Japan and I see their attention to detail, and, they have something called omotenashi, which is like their hospitality and the way that they treat people. And so you could be going into just a little gift shop or something, and just the level of customer service and the way that they package your little item that maybe cost $1, and the way that their store is set up in such a meticulous way. It's really an inspiring culture, and it really speaks to me. And, and that, again, we look to art like that. We like simplified, really clear visions. And Japan is that, it's this obviously complex, especially Tokyo. It's you're dealing with how many thousands, 100 years old culture, and modern day mixed in with it, and how they handle, they don't forget the past. They honor it, and there's so much respect there, but they're also living in the future. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm articulating that correctly, but just their way of living is in such a simplified and clean manner, I think is really inspiring. And so, if you come into our gallery, you're going to see that it's completely clutter-free. We have about a 3,500 square foot space, and there's probably 15 paintings hanging in that space because, we want that feeling of simplicity and importance, and we want people to come in and really be focused on the art. So, we might have one chair. We have, 16-foot high ceilings, all white, 100-year-old wood floors. And so that's all that stuff is inspired by, travel and our interests in minimalism and modernism and all that stuff. And so we just apply that all to the West. And part of the reason why we're in Los Angeles, besides the fact that we're from Los Angeles, is I think it's really important to put this genre of art on a main stage. If you go back 100 years ago, when the Tau Society was taking their art back to Chicago and New York and showing in the Salman Gundy Club in New York, and part of these big exhibitions of promoting the West and promoting what was going on in these smaller areas, I felt like it, if you look back, it feels like it was way more important. And so, that's missing or was missing. So, we established ourselves in LA, probably, to most people thought to our detriment. But we, been lucky enough to make it work. And so we present the art in a modern setting to show people, like, you don't have to have a log cabin to have a painting of the West. You could live in a contemporary home, and this is what it looks like in that setting. And we're in Los Angeles, and we're on that main stage in this big city, and we're holding our own, and, people are coming out and supporting. And so I think our goal of continuing this West into a new generation of collectors is really hedged on the fact that we're in LA, that we're working with artists that are forward thinking and appeal to the newer generation. And, it all comes back to that beginning vision of Logan for this gallery of wanting to have a safe space for artists to express themselves and feel free to try new things and be supported by the gallery. And, Logan is really that. If I think art history is going to look back at Logan's career and show that the Western market, for lack of a better term, we're trying to think of a new term of what to call this movement that's happening right now. But for now, we'll call it the Western market. If you look at the art from that was really popular in the 90s and maybe early 2000s, again, it was that more gray middle day, almost, I almost call them fantasy scenes, because they're these scenes of historic interactions that whoever is painting them was not alive when those interactions were happening. And so they're interpreting history books and kind of creating a fantasy of what it was. I feel like that was fading out of fashion, and it was not going to be of interest to the new generation of collectors. And so Logan came in at a time when things were starting to dip, and he came in with this new style that was, paying homage to the past, but definitely forward looking and contemporary. And, and then he also had his solid background technique of being able to paint, draw, compose, handle light and shadow, and do all the things necessary to create a great painting. And so what happened there was a lot of these collectors that maybe only collected deceased art, they didn't give much, credit to living artists. They started to dabble in living artists, and they started because they liked Logan's art so much. And so they started to buy some of his work. And then the collectors that were only collecting that more conservative work were like, whoa, what is this? And then they started to collect it, And so he created that bridge for all these collectors, both deceased collectors and the contemporary collectors, to start looking at things from a different angle. And so he was that bridge to the new generation of all these new artists and all these new collectors to be able to paint in a way that's more contemporary and more exciting, and to be accepted. Again, I give so much credit to Logan for that. He put himself out on a limb and was true to his own vision. But he also stepped up and created a gallery that would support all these other artists to do the same thing. And so if you remove Logan from this market, that means you remove our gallery, and you remove a whole generation of artists and collectors that were inspired by him. And so I think it all kind of leads back to that. And even more so why what we're doing at the gallery and this movement that's happening is even more special than I think people might realize.
That's really cool, man. And the other thing is, like, say you're describing Logan, and then if somebody's describing the success you've had, and you said all that same stuff, but you guys were both real cocky jerks. I wouldn't care one bit about anything you're doing. I would violently dislike you. And the fact is, you've done all this awesome stuff, and you're both just like super cool guys that just could not be nicer and like more welcoming to, to me, you have been, but across the board. And everybody just speaks so highly about everything y'all have done and how you've done it. And I think that's another amazing part. Maybe I'm jaded old man, but like you see a lot of people who've experienced that level of success and they're jerks. But you guys are just, it's just been such a pleasure getting to know y'all. And it, again, makes me feel better about the world that people can have this kind of success and make the world better, and also be like just the kind of people I want to hang out with. So I appreciate it, man. You guys are doing awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess we got to give credit to our parents and
yeah. That's luck, man. It is lucky to have good parents. That you're stacking the deck if that doesn't work out. But man, this was great. I'm so glad to get a chance to chat. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope we can hang out in person again one of these days.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate all your support, and thanks to everyone for listening. And if anyone has questions to reach out, give me a call or shoot me an email. You can find my information on our website. And I would love to speak to people that, even if you're not in a position to purchase anything right now, but you hope to in the future, and you have questions on where to start or what to do, we're here for that. We're all about helping people out and bringing people into the fold, because original art is something really special. And if you've never lived with original art, it's sometimes difficult to explain it to someone how important it is and how much joy you get out of an original piece of art. So, give me a call, shoot me an email, come by the gallery, and we'd love to meet you.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.